Welcome to Mickey, Marvel, and More, Disney news, commentary, and opinion. From theme parks to Thanos and from Skywalker to Skyliner, my family and I will discuss it all. So let's go!
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Mickey, Marvel, and More. My name is Marc, and I'll be your host. A little background about my family and I. We've been enjoying the Disney theme parks and the cruises for well over 30 years, and we've been DVC members since 2013. Not really trying to carbon date us or anything, but we've also been around since the creation of the Star Wars universe and the Marvel one as well. What I'm saying is that we've been lifelong fans of all things Disney, and we spent a lot of time around our family's table discussing a lot of these topics. Basically, the purpose of this podcast is to continue those discussions here, and maybe, if you're willing, bring you along for the ride. Later on in this episode, we'll bring on my better half, Laura, to talk about vacationing in Walt Disney World these days. Has it become too complicated and expensive to plan a Walt Disney World trip? Would you be willing to pay for a class to teach you how to vacation in Walt Disney World? That sounds crazy, right? I sure think it does. We'll discuss that in our very first family chat segment in just a few minutes. But first, a little news from around the world of Disney.
I can do this all day.
From the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which we have now been told by Kevin Feige himself, does include and make canon all of the Netflix programs, as well as Agent Carter. But it doesn't include Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which I guess ultimately isn't all that weird because Feige was always sort of against Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and never really liked that program to begin with. So I guess it isn't too strange, but it's a little sad, and that's a story for another day. But because of this incorporation of the Netflix shows, one of the shows currently in production, Daredevil, Born Again, needed to be shut down and completely retooled and basically started from scratch. Daredevil, which will have the return of Charlie Cox as Matt Murdock, Daredevil, Vincent D'Onofrio as Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and Jon Bernthal as Frank Castle, the Punisher. All of those guys debuted in the Netflix's original version of Daredevil. A few days ago, it was leaked that Wilson Bethel was set to be returning as Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye. But here's the big news. It's also going to bring back Deborah Ann Woll and Eldon Henson. And they've been confirmed to be reprising their beloved roles of Karen Page and Foggy Nelson. That was fantastic news to hear. It is now speculated that Bethel and Wool may only be there for 3 or so episodes, and the info on Henson's Foggy is a little less clear, and he may be around a little longer, but I, as well as many other fans, were super excited when we heard those characters of Karen Page and Foggy Nelson that they were returning. But now to hear that they may not be staying makes me a little concerned for the show, because to me, Daredevil has always been about all of them as a team. I think that their chemistry and interactions were always the heart and soul of the show, and I just feel like the show would be a little weaker without them. I'm also more than a little worried that the characters might meet a less than happy ending. Most of this is still just in the rumors phase, so fingers crossed that we don't lose Paige and Foggy to something disastrous.
Hello there.
Is the new Star Wars movie featuring Rey delayed? Well, earlier this week, some rumors surfaced that the upcoming Star Wars film featuring the return of Daisy Ridley as Rey has been delayed indefinitely. Well, why? The rumor says that it is creative differences with the film's writer, Stephen Knight. Well, Lucasfilm came out this week to squash that rumor and said that it just isn't true. I think part of the problem is that Lucasfilm just made an announcement about the big screen debut of The Mandalorian and Grogu in their very first feature film, while remaining mostly quiet about the Rey sequel. Not much has been really said about the sequel ever since they made a big splash announcing it during the opening of Star Wars Celebration in 2023. I personally would really like to see them take another crack at Rey's character. After some of the lackluster reception of her character, specifically in the final two films of the last trilogy, although I completely understand the complaints that people lodge by saying, there are more people in the Star Wars galaxy, then they don't have to have the last name of Skywalker or Solo. I really like Ridley as an actor, and I want to see her get a fair shake at this character. A lot can be said about the things that went right or wrong about the last trilogy, but that's a topic for another day.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome.
And finally today, here's a really cool story about a guy named Matthew Abels, who found an old Walt Disney World Magic Kingdom park ticket among his family's things. He shows us the adventure with this ticket in a TikTok video that's been viewed over 8.6 million times. Matthew tells us about a really neat fact about Disney's ticket policy. If you have an old, unused park ticket and there's no expiration date on it, you can still use it to this day. In the video, Abel shows us what happens when he tries to use a Walt Disney World ticket for the Magic Kingdom that was purchased in 1978. He always assumed the ticket was just an old family keepsake until he realized that it had never been used and there was no expiration date on it. Abels wasn't sure if he'd found a Willy Wonka-style golden ticket or a worthless piece of paper. Well, spoiler alert, it worked. And before he knew it, he was walking into the Magic Kingdom with a ticket that was purchased for only $8. Not bad for a 46-year-old ticket. Inflation makes that ticket worth about $38 today, but still way cheaper than a one-day park ticket in 2024. And in a way that almost makes you think that I planned it this way, this brings us to our very first family chat.
Do not pull down on the safety bar, please. I will lower it for you.
Welcome, everybody, to our very first family chat segment here on Mickey, Marvel, and More, where you guys get to be a fly on the wall for one of our conversations around the kitchen table. The topic for this week is, are Disney vacations too complicated? Are they too expensive? Are you willing to pay for a class to teach you how to go to Disney World? Well, to help us talk about that subject is our very first co-host here on Mickey, Marvel, and More, my lovely wife, Laura. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I feel so honored that I'm your very first guest on your very first family chat.
Well, nobody else would do it. No, seriously, welcome and thanks for joining us. So is it complicated? Is it overly expensive? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I consider ourselves pretty frequent Disney travelers, particularly for people who live in the middle of the country. And we will often have people ask us, ask me, ask you for Disney advice. They'll say, hey, I'm thinking about taking my family to Disney World. Tell me everything I need to know. And
Right.
that's not so easy to answer, particularly in a casual conversation. And I think it has gotten more complicated to go to Disney. It's definitely not the same experience that it was 30 years ago, where a trip was planned much differently. And in fact, I can remember a coworker talking to me 20 years ago, talking about taking his family there. And part of the fun was that they didn't plan ahead, and they went to the park in the morning, they got a map, and they had fun together figuring out where things were, what things were. And that was part of the experience and part of the fun that they had in their Disney vacation. And in fact, it was interesting. I read an article in the Washington Post this last week by Hannah Sampson. And the entire article was asking the same question: is Disney too complicated? And she was talking about the cottage industry that's kind of grown up around people helping families plan their Disney vacation, or helping people figure out how to plan their vacation themselves. And I was fascinated in reading this article by the number of things that these people do just to help people understand how to take a Disney vacation.
It really is like a math equation now.
It is. It is. So some of the things that they talked about in this article were a 200-page guide that a woman has written to help families plan their own vacation.
And this just isn't like a guidebook that tells you what to ride. This is a guidebook that tells you how to plan before you even get there to the ride.
Right.
Right.
Right. It turns out there are many services that offer online classes to teach people how to plan their own Disney vacation.
Really? So how much does a class like this run? Because maybe we're in the wrong line of work, and maybe this should welcome to the very first episode of How to Take a Disney Vacation. It will only be $300 an episode. So seriously, how much do one of these cost?
Yeah, we're definitely in the wrong line of work. These classes can range anywhere from $39 to $139.
Oh my gosh.
And these are classes that are online, much like a distance learning class or some sort of a Zoom class. Some of them are even complete with quizzes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it's serious stuff.
I wasn't told there would be a quiz.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I do have that feeling because when people ask me about what they need to do to get ready for a Disney trip, I start thinking in my head, the wheels start turning, and I start thinking, okay, you got to get up here. You got to make this phone call. You have to make these dining reservations, 60, 90 days in advance whenever they flip that switch back on to make reservations that far out. But there's this whole list of things you need to do. And when I try to explain it to somebody, they start to get a glazed look in their eyes. And then a lot of them will come back with, is this even any fun?
Right, right. I really feel like I have to walk the line when I am talking to someone about planning a Disney vacation because I don't want to overwhelm them. But at the same time, Disney vacations are so expensive anymore that you want to get your money's worth. And you want to make sure that when you go down there, you're doing what you want to do, seeing what you want to see. And unfortunately, that just takes planning. And, Disney has not made that planning any easier in the last few years. Back in the day, back in our first trips to Disney, you stood in line, and you stood in line a lot, but you also knew that was just part of the territory, and that came along with it.
Right.
And there were guidebooks that we used to buy and study that would talk to you about the optimal way to tour the parks and stand in line, and which rides you should go to first, and to give you sample touring plans so that you could maximize your time and minimize the time you stood in line.
Right. But it was a guidebook for actually using during the trip. It wasn't,
Yes.
the A, B, C, D, E, F, G list of things to do before you sometimes even before you plan on making a reservation.
Right. And then Disney went to the Fast Pass system that was easier than what they have today, where you go to the ride that you want to ride. You get the little paper tickets. It gave you a return time, and then you could go and do other things and come back during that return time.
Right.
That was a system that worked pretty well. Then Disney went to a digital system pre-pandemic where you would book your fast passes online before you even went, which was nice. At first it felt a little restrictive because you just had the 3 in advance and you couldn't go and get paper fast passes sort of as quickly as you could manage them. But it was kind of nice to have at least 3 sort of pre-planned per park before you even left home.
I refer to that as the golden age of Fast Pass because you could book the 3 tickets per day in one park, and you could do that for every day of your trip. And once we started using that system, we realized just how nice it was. Okay, you've got these 3 rides. They are ready to go. And then as soon as you ride those, you can start making some other reservations. And the best part about all of this is it was free.
Right.
It didn't cost anything.
Right.
And then we had the horrible pandemic, and then boom, Disney flips the switch and introduces.
Yeah, Genie Plus.
Right.
Genie Plus. That's the most recent version of the jump to the head of the line, short line system. And Genie Plus, for those that don't know, is a system where you pay per day to have access to their online reservation system for rides. But unlike the Fast Pass pre-pandemic, this is something that you have to do day of. So it requires you on your vacation to be up at 7 in the morning, 7 a.m.
Well, actually before that, so you can start hitting refresh.
Right. So getting up before 7 a.m. on your vacation in order to start booking your Genie Plus reservations for the day. And, I've got to say it's a little bit cumbersome to do that.
Right.
Often when we go to the parks, we will have some late nights and some early mornings, but we typically don't have a late night followed by an early morning. So if we're going to stay at the park until midnight or later, we don't typically get up before 7 a.m. So, this new Genie Plus system really kind of puts a damper on that. Regardless of how late you stayed up the night before, you still better get up before 7 a.m. if you want to get any sort of value out of your Genie Plus reservations for the day.
If you're going to use Genie Plus, you've got to get up to use it. And I guess we need to address the cost factor, because the price of using Genie Plus is based on the park you're in and the popularity of that park. So, for example, Magic Kingdom's Genie Plus pass is generally more expensive than the other parks.
Right.
And this is a per person price. And so I think, gosh, they were talking at Christmas time for Genie Plus. Wasn't it hitting upwards of like $45 a day?
Something like that.
$45 a day a head per person. So you're looking at, you got 5 people or 4 people, do the math. That's over and above all the reservations that you've paid for, over and above the park ticket you used to get in, over and above what it's going to cost you to eat. And if you're going to buy any souvenirs, the price is going to rack up pretty fast. And we haven't even talked about the lightning lanes, which are the same line you use for Genie Plus, but there are certain rides that aren't on Genie Plus that you then have to pay extra to get to the jump to the head of the line. And that's the big rides at each park. You're looking at Rise of the Resistance. You're looking at Guardians of the Galaxy, Cosmic Rewind. You're looking at, I think is the Railroad still on it? Or I don't think the Railroad is anymore. The Mickey.
Tron.
Oh yeah, the Tron at Magic Kingdom. I was thinking of the Mickey and Minnie Railway. I don't think that's on there anymore. But that is another price that's over and above that.
Right. It was interesting when they first introduced Genie Plus, we thought, we're such veterans of the parks. We're never going to use it. We don't need to pay an extra upcharge per person per day just to get that benefit. But honestly, we've found that you do have to do it on occasion. Now, we don't buy it every day, every park.
Right.
But we will buy it at least a couple of days per trip.
And we will sometimes buy the individual lightning lanes just to make sure that we can ride Rise of the Resistance. Are we making Disney vacations not sound fun? I mean, we still have a very good time, and it's something we've always done, and it's our family's traditions. But you try to explain this to people and they think you're crazy. You're like, why aren't you going to the beach, sitting in a chaise lounge and having a margarita? Why are you getting up at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning to make these reservations that you've got to pay for?
Because it's magical, dang it.
Right.
We're making family memories.
That's right.
I will say this about Genie Plus, though. A few months ago, they started a bit of a new system with Genie Plus where you can purchase a multi-park Genie Plus for the day. So one of the drawbacks with Genie Plus originally is that it was per park. So if you bought a Genie Plus at Magic Kingdom, for example, which is where you were starting your day, But then later on in the day, you decided to go to Animal Kingdom, for example. That Genie Plus that you purchased in Magic Kingdom could not be used at Animal Kingdom later in the day.
And if you got to Animal Kingdom, you would have to rebuy Genie Plus for that park. And that really wasn't an ideal situation at all, because most of those reservations by then would be gone.
Right.
And it'd be throwing your money away.
Right. The other drawback to that is, even if you had purchased Genie Plus at the second park, you couldn't start making those reservations until you were actually in the park.
Right.
Which, again, same problem. By the time you got there, the Genie Plus reservations would largely be gone for the more popular rides.
Right.
But with this multi-day Genie Plus, not only can you use it in all 4 parks when you purchase it, you can also make reservations for those other parks even when you are not yet in that park.
Which makes it a little more like the golden age of Fast Pass, except you're paying for it.
Right, right. The pricing on that is essentially the same price as whatever the most expensive park that day is, which is typically Magic Kingdom.
Right.
So I think getting the multi-park Genie Plus makes a lot of sense if you are going to Magic Kingdom and then some other park.
Right.
In fact, I used that multi-day Genie Plus on a trip in November, and it worked really well. And I felt like we maximized our value with that multi-park Genie Plus.
That was when you and your friends went, and because I don't think we've been there yet as a family with this new park hopping version.
No.
And I think you had indicated that it really does make a difference, particularly for the Magic Kingdom, I believe you said.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and again, it was just helpful to have that particular day. We started in Animal Kingdom, and so we were able to use the Genie Plus to get on some of the rides that have a little more of a wait, like the Avidar Pandora Flight of Passage ride and Expedition Everest and the Safari. And then when we hopped over to Magic Kingdom early that afternoon, then we could use those Genie Plus reservations for the rest of the afternoon and evening there. So again, I felt like we were using it all day long, constantly, and it was really a time saver.
Well, this is good information. This is good to know. Hopefully that we can pass this knowledge along to other people and they can get some use out of it and not be totally frightened. I hope we haven't scared anybody off of a Disney trip, but I'd like to let people know what they're getting into these days. It's completely different. You talk to somebody who went to the Magic Kingdom in 1975 or 1976, and you explain to them that, first of all, the park tickets cost this much. Second of all, you have to make reservations for this. Oh, then you have to make reservations just to get into the park. Oh, and then you have to make reservations for the rides, which you have to pay for. And suddenly it sounds like, you know what? I'm going to the beach.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that people understand that it is still fun. And you can have spontaneity when you go. But if you're going to do that, just know in advance, you might have some frustrations. And if you're okay with that, that's fine. Just be prepared for that outcome.
Right, right. So I guess to answer the question that we started with, are Disney vacations too complicated? I don't think they're too complicated. They're certainly more complicated than they used to be, but I think you can pretty quickly pick up the system.
Right.
If you do a little bit of reading, a little bit of pre-planning, you certainly don't have to create a spreadsheet to go, but I think it is.
Some of us do.
I think it is helpful to at least know a little bit about how the system works before you get there.
Right. Well, thank you very much for joining us on our very first family chat segment here on Mickey, Marvel, and More. And I hope it's been a pleasant experience and you'll come back again sometime.
Why, yes. Thank you.
Once again, thanks to my lovely wife, Laura, for joining us as co-host for our very first family chat. And thank you to anyone out there who's been listening to our very first episode of Mickey, Marvel, and More. Any of the stories that we talked about today will have all of their links in the show notes, as well as where to reach us on our socials. Let us know what you think. Make comments about the topics we talked about. Let us know if you have any ideas about what we could talk about next. Our email is mickeymarvelandmore, all one word, @gmail.com. My name is Mark, and if you had a good time, this has been Mickey, Marvel, and More. If you didn't, my name is Steve, and this has been Yarn Chat on NPR. We'll see you next time.